Chapter 1. An Old Hat. My name's Dr. Watson, and I'm a good friend of the famous detective Sherlock Holmes. 2 days after Christmas last year, I went to his house at 221B Baker Street. I wanted to say Happy Christmas to him. When I arrived, I found him in the sitting room. He was by the window with some newspapers next to him. There was an old hat on a chair near him, and he had a magnifying glass in his hand. "You're working on something," I said. "Shall I go?" "No," said Holmes. "Sit down and look at that interesting old hat over there." I sat down. It was cold out in the street, but it was nice and warm in Holmes's sitting room. "Why are you interested in that old hat? Is it something to do with a crime?" I asked. Holmes laughed. "Not a crime, no," he said. "I got it from Peterson, the doorman at the Baker Street Hotel. He found it in the street and brought it here on Christmas Day for me to look at. He also brought a dead bird with him, a good fat Christmas goose, at the same time. I gave the goose back to him this morning. He's cooking it at his house now, and he's going to eat it for dinner tonight." "Oh, first it was a hat, and now you're talking about a goose," I said. "I don't understand." "Then let's begin when it all began," said Holmes. At about 4 o'clock in the morning of Christmas Day, Peterson went home after work. When he got to Tottenham Court Road, he saw, in the street in front of him, a tall man with a goose over his shoulder. Peterson walked behind him for some time. There were some young men in the street in front of them. Suddenly, one of them hit the tall man's hat off his head, and it fell into the road. Then the tall man tried to hit the young man with his walking stick, but by accident he broke the window of a shop behind him. At that moment, Peterson ran to the man to help him, but the tall man ran away. Perhaps he felt bad about breaking the shop window. Perhaps he thought that Peterson, in his doorman's coat and hat, was a policeman. When he ran, he left his Christmas bird in the street next to his hat. The young men ran away at the same time. So Peterson took the goose and the hat home with him, and the next day he brought them here. There was an interesting little ticket on the goose's left leg, said Holmes. It said, "For Mr. and Mrs. Henry Baker." We can find the letters HB in the hat, too. "Oh, so the owner of the hat and the goose is called Henry Baker," I said. "Yes," answered Holmes. "But, my dear Watson, this doesn't help us very much. There are hundreds of Henry Bakers in London. I gave the goose back to Peterson this morning, he went on, and I said to him, "Have this for your dinner." I didn't want it to go bad, you know. "Did Mr. Baker put an advertisement in the newspaper about his hat and goose?" I asked. "No," answered Holmes. "Then how can we find him?" "Well, perhaps his hat can help us," said Holmes. "Here's my magnifying glass, Watson. Now, you be a detective for a minute or two. What can you tell me about the owner of this hat?" I took the magnifying glass and looked at the hat. It was black, but old, and very, very dirty. I saw the letters HB in it. For me, it was no different from any other old black hat. "I can see nothing," I said, and I gave the hat back to my friend. "Excuse me, Watson, you do see, but you don't think about what you see." "All right," I said. "What can you see in this hat?" "The owner of this hat is an intelligent man," said Holmes. "He was once rich and is now poor. His wife loved him once, but she doesn't love him now. And he's 30 or 40 years old." "Well, perhaps I'm slow, Holmes, but I don't understand," I said. "Why is he an intelligent man, do you think?" Holmes put the hat on his head. It came down to his nose. "This is a big hat. A man with a big hat has a big head. And a man with a big head has a big brain. A man with a big brain thinks a lot." "But you say he was once rich and is now poor. Why?" "The hat is 3 years old. I remember these hats were in all the shops then. They were very expensive, too. 3 years ago, this man bought a good hat. So he was rich then, but he has no money to buy a new hat now, so these days he is poor." "All right," I said, "but you say he is in his 30s or 40s. How does the hat tell you this?" "Well, when I looked carefully at the hat with my magnifying glass, I could see some grey hairs in it. People usually get grey hair in their 30s or 40s. "I see. But what about his wife? You say she doesn't love him." "Because the hat is very dirty. When a woman loves her husband, she cleans his hat for him." Perhaps he hasn't got a wife." "Yes, he has. Remember the ticket on the goose's leg?" "Ah, yes," I said. "You have an answer for everything." At that moment, the door opened, and Peterson, the hotel doorman, ran into the room. He looked very excited. "The goose, Mr. Holmes! The goose!" he said. "What's the matter with the goose?" asked Holmes. "Did it come back from the dead and fly off through the kitchen window?" "No, Mr. Holmes. My wife found this in the bird." Peterson opened his hand. There was a beautiful blue diamond in it. Chapter 2. The Blue Diamond. When Sherlock Holmes saw the diamond in the doorman's hand, he sat up. "Well, well, Peterson," he said. "What a wonderful thing to find in a goose. Do you know what you have in your hand?" "I think it's a diamond, Mr. Holmes. Is it expensive?" "Yes, it is," said Holmes. "This is the Countess of Morcar's blue diamond. It disappeared a week ago." "How do you know that?" I said. "Watson, you must read the newspapers more often. There's an advertisement in the Times today about it. Here, look." Holmes gave the advertisement to me. Then Holmes spoke to the doorman. "It's a very expensive jewel, Peterson. The Countess paid about £20,000 for it. Last week, someone took it from her rooms in the Cosmopolitan Hotel. Now the Countess wants to get her diamond back. She says that she's going to give £1,000 to the finder." "£1,000?" cried Peterson excitedly. Then, without saying more, he sat down in the chair between us. First he looked at Holmes, and then he looked at me. "The diamond disappeared 5 days ago, I think," I said. "Yes," answered Holmes. "They say a young man, John Horner, took it. Here's a newspaper report about the case." Holmes gave an old newspaper to me, and I read the report. "A diamond disappears from the Cosmopolitan Hotel. The Countess of Morcar's blue diamond disappeared from her room at the Cosmopolitan Hotel on the 22nd of this month. The police think John Horner, 26 years old, took the diamond from a jewel box when he went to repair the window in the room. James Ryder, the assistant manager of the hotel, told the court, 'I took Horner to the Countess's room, but then I went away for some time. When I came back, Horner wasn't there, and I found the open box, without the jewel in it, on the table next to the bed.' Catherine Cusack, the Countess's maid, spoke next. 'I heard Mr. Ryder call, and I ran to the Countess's room. There I found Ryder with the jewel box in front of him. The police found Horner at his home later that day, but they couldn't find the diamond. Later, Detective Bradstreet spoke to the court. 'When I said, "You're a diamond thief," Horner hit me.' Soon after that, Horner told the court angrily, 'You've got the wrong man. I didn't take the Countess's diamond. I'm not a thief.' Bradstreet then told the court, 'Horner went to prison once before for being a thief. I say he took the diamond. The case goes to the High Court next week.'" "Well, that's the newspaper report about the diamond," said Holmes. "Now we need to understand how the jewel left the Countess of Morcar's room in the Cosmopolitan Hotel and arrived in Tottenham Court Road in a goose. You see, Watson, there is a crime in this case. Here's the diamond. The diamond came from the goose, and the goose came from Mr. Henry Baker, the man with the old hat. I know you felt a little bored when I told you all about Mr. Baker, but now we must find him. Where and how does he come into the case of the blue diamond? The answer to these two questions is most important. "But how can we find him?" I asked. "Through a newspaper advertisement," answered Holmes. He took a pen and began to write. "Did you lose a goose and a black hat some days ago in Tottenham Court Road? Are you called Henry Baker? Please come to 221B Baker Street this evening at 6:30 to get your things." "There. That says it all, I think," said Holmes. "Yes, but is he going to read it?" I asked. "Yes, Watson, I think he is. He's a poor man, remember? At the time he was afraid because of his accident with the shop window, but now I believe he feels very sorry about running away and thinks, 'Why did I leave that bird in the street?' Perhaps he looked for a newspaper advertisement about it yesterday. I think he's going to look again today, too. What's more, we've got his name in the advertisement, so I believe his friends are going to see it and tell him about it." "Yes, I see," I said. Holmes gave some money to the doorman and said, "Peterson, please go down to the newspaper offices and put this advertisement in all the evening newspapers." "Very good, sir. And shall I leave the diamond with you, sir?" "Yes, Peterson. And I say, Peterson, after you leave the newspaper offices, can you buy a goose and bring it back here? We need a new bird for Mr. Henry Baker when he comes. Your family is eating the old one for dinner today, so he can't have that." The doorman went out of the door and down the street.